Ah, finally I can play some Shadow Priest. Zod, is that you? Thought you died. Jaina? Pop my void form and give in? Save power infusion for myself? Fuck, Zod! You are insane, man.
But what's not insane is a segue into subscribing to the channel. Hey, listen, if you like the video and the kind of stuff that we do, it actually helps us a lot if you subscribe and obviously enable those notifications, because we do other types of videos that you might not ever know about, because YouTube doesn't feel obliged to tell you, as long as they're not class type videos. We have podcasts, we have tier lists, we have streams about different classes. What are you waiting for? It's just 2 clicks, and it actually helps us a lot. Thank you very much. And let's talk about Shadow. Shadow Priest, the ninja meta class. Shadow has been performing really well for a few patches now, and it always is overshadowed by super meta specs like Fire Mage and Balanced Druid. But even Shadow didn't manage to escape the wrath of the devs, so let's actually see what changes in 9.1 are awaiting Shadow Priests. First of all, Devouring Plague is being nerfed, having its damage reduced by a general 18%. This hits the single target damage profile of Shadow pretty hard, since Devouring Plague can end up being around 25% of your total damage at the very least. Shadow was already performing pretty well in regards to the other DPSers in the game, especially in raids, so the nerf may not be as surprising as some people may think. It will affect the Mind Devourer conduit, which in turn fuels the Talbadar's legendary viability, but we will see how this translates into sims and stuff. Alongside Devouring Plague nerfs, there are buffs to Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch, specifically a 25% damage increase to both of these. This is actually a good thing for the overall feel of the spec, which has always been a dot class. Although these have been buffed, the overall single target nerf that Shadow will sustain will be at about 4%, which is actually very reasonable. The dots buff, however, see multi-dotting encounters be a bit better for the spec. The Dissonant Echoes conduit has also been nerfed to buff Void Bolt by 20% instead of 35%, again affecting single target performance. And together with this, the Finesse conduit Clear Mind has been nerfed to reduce the mana cost by 15% down to 20%. These nerfs, although seemingly large in the context of conduits, the overall performance of the spec will be hardly affected. As such, the likelihood of Dissonant Echoes still being used with Soulbinds having an extra potency slot is very high. And all of these are well and good, but now we are getting to the legendaries. Shadow Flame Prism has had its damage component reduced by 15% and Talbadar's Stratagem by 8%. The Prism was the go-to, and I suppose it still is on live servers, legendary for the Night Fae Covenant, and has some of the coolest interactions with the rotations as opposed to Talbadar's, which is nothing but a flat damage buff. Since one of the major factors into making Prism good is also the extension of Mindbender, netting more insanity overall. Its overall performance has been nerfed by 10%, roughly speaking, when taking this into consideration. Although Talbadar's was used for other covenants, which although still close in performance, a tad behind Night Fae, it was still outperforming the other Shadow legendaries, and nerfs see these two specifically align better with the other options, hopefully. So far, however, Talbadar looks like it will see even less use, since with the new potency slot, you will likely want to use Rabid Shadows over Mind Devourer, and Rabid Shadows favors Prisms while Devourer favors Talbadar, and Shadows is already stronger than Devourer, so... And some more interesting news, Covenant Legendaries. So far, okay. Let's start with the Night Fae. There you will get Buansamdi's Pact, which has a neat fantasy in that it gives you a direct mask on the target. This effect transforms your Night Fae Guardian's ability into the direct mask ability once you've popped it initially, which you can move around your targets, and it will copy the effect of the active Fae Guardian on whichever target it will be. Active on the target. This essentially makes the supporty Covenant ability even more support-ish. It will also have to take the place of likely Shadowflame Prison, which the cooldown reduction to Void Eruption added might not make it viable enough as a DPS option. Personally, I dislike both the Covenant ability and this legendary. They may be alright for Holy or Discipline, but come on, man. On a class with 2 support specs, why force the third to have an increased support role as well? Wish the effect would be something that can directly affect your DPS throughput as a DPS spec. Goddamn, man! Verdict? Bleh. For Venthyr, the effect has changed since it was initially announced. Same thing with the Night Fae, I suppose. But now, Shadow Word Manipulation will increase the reversed healing and damage by 10%, increase the duration of mind games on the target by 3 seconds, and when it fully reverses or inverses the full amount of either healing or damage, it will give you a 3% crit chance for each second left of its duration. This new iteration is a bit better with a potential buff of crit of over 20%, depending on conduits and how quickly the target consumes one of its effects, regardless of the debuff expired on the target or not. Although the redesign is better, the power gain is still lacking overall, since you would have to replace a legendary slot already taken by good legendaries in a Covenant that's already the weakest with a potential legendary that in numbers might already underperform the other options. Although the concept is interesting, it might need some number adjustments to replace the other legendaries, let alone put Venthyr on the same level or above the other Covenants. As it stands, in a perfect scenario, it will still be behind Prism by 4 to 5% overall damage. Verdict? Not today. The Necrolord legendary Palette command is yet unclear. We know you will have a Maldraxxi pet when you cast Holy Nova. When an ally is healed through the Covenant ability's effect, the pet becomes stronger. The effects have been tested recently and seem incredibly buggy, and there is already a list of these issues, some of which are the lack of interaction with the Mastery and Void form. It can have some nice potential there, but there will always be pet AI issues that, for instance, Shadowflame Prism does not have. Plus, it seems to be boring and buggy. Did I mention it's buggy? Verdict? Huh? Kyrians might have gotten the best Covenant legendary, for all specs even, but we are here to talk Shadow. Sphere's Harmony will make Boon of the Ascendant's cooldown be reduced by 2 seconds for each stack of the buff accumulated during its uptime to a maximum of 1 minute cooldown reduction, bringing it down to a potential 2-minute cooldown. This essentially means that it will line up with Power Infusion for 2-minute burst fights. Could be a good option in raids if a 2-minute damage profile would actually be preferable in Sanctum. Boon is still an awkward spell to use as a Shadow Priest, but at least now it will function better, and it actually remains the only real cool ability that Shadow gets from any of the Covenants. As it stands, it could be the best single target build Shadow has available, with an incredible lackluster performance in AoE though, which we all know it's dog shit when it comes to choosing your Covenant. Most of the power will come from Pelagos for being an absolute G, but then again, is it enough? Verdict? Biased. Currently in Nathria, Shadow is sitting comfortably as the best performing single target spec and within the top 3 specs based on the current logs. Although logs are logs, I know, it has remained consistently at the top since the latter half of the raid tier, once the big Shadow boys and gals got enough gear to pump some numbers. It actually performs incredibly well for pure single target bosses, which thankfully Nathria provided. The single target nerfs will definitely hit the performance, but very likely not as much as people like to overreact to, considering we will have access to a third potency slot that will counteract most if not all of these nerfs. Shadow always scaled really well with each subsequent raid tier, and the nerfs are likely to keep it in check and not turn into another balance druid. The nerf to Devouring Plague and buff to the General Dot sees the spec attempt to switch to its damage profile from the Spender to the Builders, with an added caveat that Dots being buffed helps more in AoE than Plague being stronger. Although with the addition of Searing Nightmare in Shadowlands, Shadow still has no baseline Insanity Spender for AoE scenarios. Searing Nightmares is the best right now, and with the 9.1 testing that theory crafters like Publik have done, the row actually seems competitive. Blizzard seems to also like to design builder spender classes with no baseline AoE spender ability, however, which personally I am not a fan of. First decay. The reason I'm on the fence with the damage switch is that as a builder spender spec, spending the Insanity felt rewarding and impactful in 905, as opposed to more passive damage from dots. I understand the concept, however. And this ties into Shadow's performance in Mythic Plus, which is a lot harder to pinpoint even with logs, and that's probably due to Power Infusion as the main culprit. For the better teams, it's likely that Shadow is brought for Power Infusion, and if it isn't, it might still see Shadows use their Power Infusion for their mages or DKs and so on, so that their group would have an even higher overall DPS. With all of that, Shadow is still middle of the pack, although I do want to preface this that with the note that all specs can clear statistically higher overall keys than in BFA, pointing towards a better general balance. AKA, playing Shadow will still make you able to clear any and all content relatively competitively with the average player, since it's unlikely any of us are MDI players in our free time. So yeah, take all of this with a grain of salt. First of all, we still have no clue what the Necrolord's legendary does when the bugs will be fixed. Second, the Venthyr one has already been changed once, same with the Night Fae. Third, the numbers are constantly being tuned every week, not for Shadow specifically, but could still be a possibility, and the spec itself will need more iterations to be tested. Fourthly, even if nothing else changes until 9.1 releases, it's unlikely the meta will be clear before the first few weeks of Mythic Sanctum of Domination, since on Heroic you could probably spam Shadow Word Death outside execute range and likely be fine to get curved. Is this elitist? Nah, impossible. Cannot be elitist if you're a heroic raider. But in any case, keep your eyes peeled on the Warcraft Priest community Discord for any and all updates, as well as Wowhead articles where theory crafters voice their opinions and feedback on things. Or if you are more of a video content consumer, keep tabs on Publik, one of the most dedicated and outspoken Shadow priests that makes really insightful Shadow content. Also was on our podcast and helped us with the feedback for this particular understanding of the 9.1 changes for Shadow. So thank you, Publik. You rock, man. Thank you to our Patrons as well, who also rock pretty hardcore. Thank you for supporting our content, guys, and all of the video series that we have. The class changes for 9.1, which will obviously turn into the guides when 9.1 releases, the tier lists, and the podcast, and of course the streams and everything else that we do here. Really much appreciated. You guys really do make a lot of this possible. And dear viewer, if you are interested in supporting our channel a little bit more, the link to our Patreon is down below, alongside with other stuff that you might find interesting. Thank you for watching the video, hope you found it helpful, and we'll see you next time.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.